All right, thank you for staying with us. The World Bank delivered a sobering assessment of Nigeria's economy, projecting it to take about 10 to 15 years for the nation to undergo remarkable transformation. The revelation exposes the pressing challenges ahead and calls for urgent decisions, decisive actions to steer the economy towards recovery and resilience. Senior Vice President, World Bank Group, Indemit Gill, spoke at the 30th Nigerian Economic Summit Group, emphasized that the government must do everything in its power to protect the most vulnerable citizens from hardship, as their lives and lives of Nigerians, 110 million children, depends on it. He added that the first thing to prioritize is not all sector growth, which he says requires a competitive exchange rate, which he says Nigeria has at the moment. He stressed that Nigeria's real exchange rate is at its most competitive in at least 20 years. Well, let's talk to Dr. Andrew Nevin, an economist, research professor, joins us from Dallas in the United States of America. Dr. Nevin, good afternoon and thank you for being on the program.
Hello, my brother. It's always great to be with you.
I'm sure you saw that write-up by the World Bank. And you see, let me ask that, what's your overview? What do you make of that write-up? How optimistic are you about Nigeria's economy? I know you used to be very optimistic and you are still optimistic. But what do you make of that write-up?
I'm still optimistic. I mean, we all know the challenges. I mean, the 10 to 15 years is discouraging. But I mean, if we unpack it, I mean, at a certain level, there really isn't much new in that. And I think people need to understand a couple of things. I mean, the World Bank's recommendations over the decades have been very, I guess, linear is the term I would use for it. For example, 20 years ago, they were advocating big infrastructure investments in Africa. They thought that would lift people out of poverty. Didn't turn out to be true. And, you know, this, I don't want to make this a criticism. I mean, one of the things that happens at the World Bank, of course, is the people always change. So the messages when I was in Nigeria a few years ago were the same with different people. When I was in Nigeria 7 years ago, the same different people. 10 years ago, same different people. So it's just a repeat of the same things. I think what this particular criticism is missing is it's not about policy. I mean, Nigerians know what good policies are. I mean, we should obviously eliminate the foil subsidy, and we should eliminate an exchange rate that's been stabilized, and we should direct resources to the most vulnerable, and we should focus on education. Everyone knows that. The issue in Nigeria is that the state, the state apparatus, the federal government and the state governments are not set up to actually, deliver for the people. I mean, there's an incredible book just put out by the Honorable Minister Shamsuddin, which has fantastic authors all around what they call the principal agent problem. So this is looking at the agent is the people, and the agent is the government, the civil service and the politicians, and the principal are the people, and is the agent serving the people? And until that fundamental issue is solved, we're not going to make much progress. So just trying to tell Nigerians what policies to take is not a step forward. Nigerians know what policies are needed, and the only people who are going to solve Nigerians' challenges are Nigerians. But in answer to your question at the beginning, yeah, I remain optimistic. I mean, when I follow events in Nigeria and people that I believe in, they say we're making slow progress. So that's encouraging. But, we'll make this progress with or without the World Bank.
They also talked about tightening monetary policy because they're looking at a growing and recovering economy. So they are saying that the way to go is to tighten up. And we know that for the time that the central bank has been tightening up since 2022, all we've seen is the hit. The real sector has been taking that hit. So what do you make of that development as it has to do with tightening up interest rates?
I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I think that tightening up, not tightening up is irrelevant and a distraction for Nigeria. I mean, the analogy I'll give you is that the central bank governor or the Central Bank of Nigeria is a race car driver. And they move the needle, the sticks around or the steering wheel around a little bit. And, the central bank does a good job of that. But the issue is, are they driving a race car from the 1920s, the 1950s, the 1980s, or the 2020s? So as long as the economy structurally is not working and the government is not doing things to actually serve the people, then whether we raise interest rates 50 basis points, 150 basis points, cut them 75, it doesn't really make any difference in my view.
Let's now stay again.
Just go back to what Joe was saying, Joseph was saying in your previous speaker on this. I mean, I think he's exactly right. I mean, people, one of the preconditions for making progress in Nigeria is people want to invest. But, this administration, in my view, has done so many things to make people not want to invest. And let me just highlight what is going on in the oil and gas industry. So you have Africa's richest man takes an enormous risk to build the world's largest refinery in 4 decades. It comes on stream. And then we have conflict between the government and Mr. Dangote about it. And outside investors, I can tell you, will look at this and say, if Mr. Dangote can't navigate investing in Nigeria at that scale, how can I possibly, or my company navigate? So we're not going to invest in Nigeria, and it's that simple.
Well, you have seen the fallout of the reforms instituted by President Bola Tinubu. You are aware of all that has been happening. And I know before now, we've had discussions around subsidy removal and opening up the FX market. Now, some analysts are coming back to say, no, subsidy would have been removed. The foreign exchange market would have still been left to be managed by the central bank. People are coming up with other policies or other suggestions now that the deed has been done. What do you make of these policy moves by this administration? And how best do you think this fallout can be managed? The World Bank has talked about the vulnerable ones. How do we address their challenges?
Well, removal of the foil subsidy, which in fact has not been removed because now it's creeping back in another form, I think, as everyone knows at this point. But the idea of the removal was then we would channel the resources that were essentially being there was a form of corruption, the foil subsidy. We all know that. It's well documented. And then the resources had to be reallocated and sent, to help the most vulnerable. And the reality is, from a fiscal situation, both the federal government and the state governments are in a much better position. I mean, before I retired in 2023, you recall there was not a single kobo that was flowing from the Federation account to the states because of the foil subsidy. That's been reversed, and now there's a significant amount. Question is whether that money is getting to the most vulnerable there. I mean, it's difficult for me to say on that. I don't think it's been as effective. And the idea was never liberalize the exchange rate, eliminate the foil subsidy, and stop there. We need to do other things to show that the government is actually acting in the people's best interest. And I don't think there have been enough things or anything really beyond these two changes to show that the government is acting in the people's best interest. As I said, I urge people to read this incredible book. By Honorable Minister Usman and all of the great writers in there, including the Emir of Kano and Benedict Orama, Dr. Emi Kale, have all written about this. Until the government starts serving the people, doesn't matter what policies we choose on that. And I don't think we've turned that corner. And I have been, as I mentioned earlier in this talk, very disappointed that we don't have a better investment environment. Joseph talked about it as well. I mean, I talked back in 2015, 2016, unless we had at least double the amount of investment coming into Nigeria a year, whether from Nigerians or from outsiders, we would not make progress. And it's very sad for me to look at, 7, 8, 9 years later, that we still don't have an environment where people want to invest in Nigeria. So, going back to what you mentioned about the monetary policy, if we don't have an environment where you want to invest in Nigeria, where people don't want to invest, it really is irrelevant what we do with interest rates.
But like back again, like you said, 10 to 15 years, we really need to unpack this. That is a lot. You will agree.
I don't. Let me give some reasons for optimism. First, it's not like we're unaware that fundamentally the government's or the principal Asian problem or the social contract is the core of the issue. And there are lots of people in Nigeria that are working on it. So let me, highlight. I highlighted Honorable Minister Usman. I mean, the Ige Igmakwe Foundation, of course, Ige is sadly now the CEO of Access and built Access. But they're working very hard on improving governance in Nigeria because they recognize that as the core issue. I mean, SPPG, the School of Politics, Public Policy and Governance, started by the incredible Madame Dr. Obi. I mean, it's just game-changing for Nigeria to try to focus on this governance issue. So there are leaders that are recognizing it and doing a lot. I remain optimistic. I mean, I think the vice president's policies around outsourcing are really critical. I mean, we wrote the paper about the potential benefits of outsourcing. And of course, with the way technology has moved on and COVID affected us, outsourcing is much wider than we thought about 20, or even 10 years ago. We've got legal services outsourced, accounting services, of course, everything connected to AI, to back office call center, and that's going to explode in Nigeria. So, I remain cautiously optimistic, but until the federal government sends a clear signal that it's acting on behalf of the people, I think it's a problem. I think one thing that the World Bank said that was very clear was we need absolute, can't remember the exact words, there were 3 words, but absolute transparency in what is happening with NNPC and the flows. And I've said on our show every quarter that that's not happening, and that's been a big disappointment to me. And I'll go a little further today. When I was in Nigeria, I advocated for partially privatizing the NNPC. It would provide for more transparency if it was listed on the stock exchange. At the time, I was advocating for like a minority privatization, 20 or 30%. But I don't see any reason right now where we are, where the best policy, in fact, would not be to float a majority of NNPC. So let the pension funds own it, the PFAs, own the NNPC, give absolute transparency, and give people the sense that the NNPC really serves Nigeria. And right now, that sense is not coming. I've said that consistently because if the government is not willing to show that NNPC is serving the people, then the rest of the policies, I'm not sure how relevant they are.
Well, they have all time maintained, that's the NNPCL. I'm not holding brief for them, but in discussions that I've had with them, they say they are now a limited liability company. That's one. They also say that a company now that they must make profit for Nigerians, 220 million Nigerians. NNPC is saying they own that company because they're a national oil company. And they are no more a regulator in the market. They are now a player. The authority remains a regulator. That's according to the PIA. So I'm asking you, how do all of this, I'm thinking, or many of us are thinking, that as we move on, things should change. Don't you think along that line?
Well, the PIA was a great step forward, and obviously you need to separate out the regulatory body from the operations of the company that's producing oil and gas or But I don't think it's gone far enough. I'm not sure, the idea of the limited LLC is to have transparency, but we don't have outside stockholders. We just have the federal government owning the NNPC, and it hasn't shown the transparency. And of course, yes, it needs to make a profit, but I think it'll make a much bigger profit for Nigerian people if it has now, as I said, not just a minority float, but a majority float. So 60 or 70% of the company is owned by investors, but primarily they'll be Nigerians through their PFAs on that. I think that's the time to take the step. I'm not sure what the purpose is anymore of having the government own 100% of NNPC. It's certainly not working for Nigerians as currently structured. So the PIA was an important step, but I think we need to take the next step. And also, the capital markets, there was a rise up, but they've been moribund the last little while. What a jolt for the capital markets if we put in a big player like NNPC and float 60 or 70% of it.
Okay, let's now have an outlook. Of course, with all of this, the World Bank came up to say the growth is still going to be within 3 to 3.2%. I know that is on your part, that is really slow growth. But let's look at that considering where we are coming from. Yes, considering where we are coming from and the reforms that are on the way. Do you think that what sort of growth are you expecting? Do you align with what the World Bank has revealed or put in this report? Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe you unmute yourself.
I can hear you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's disappointing. When I was in country, I talked about 6 to 8% growth as the minimum. We haven't come anywhere close to that in the year and a bit since I've left. It's disappointing. I think 3%, 3.5%, that range is the number. But it's an indication that the government hasn't necessarily done the right things, particularly around this governance issue that I think is the most important one on that. So, it's better than 2%, it's better than 1.5%, but it isn't anywhere near the potential. And of course, I stood up many times in Nigeria and said, I don't understand why we can't grow 10%. China did it for 30 years in a row. We have, all the reasons. I don't need to list them out for the people listening. We have all the reasons the economy should be doing fantastic, but 6% is the minimum, and we're still sitting at 3%. So very disappointing from that perspective.
Now, finally for you, The banking sector, you know what is happening here, the recapitalization process that the central bank says all of them must undertake. And we see that there's a bit of confidence with some of the banks, at least the tier one banks, the top on the rank. And it seems like it's going to be just easy pass for them to get this funding and all of that. What do you make of that? And at the end of the day, what does that translate to for Nigeria's banking industry?
Well, let me start out by saying the banking industry is really a bright light in Nigeria. I mean, one thing that people realize is the banking industry in Nigeria is Nigerian. I mean, if you go around Africa, there are often foreign banks that dominate. I mean, it's fantastic. I won't list out the giant entrepreneurs, but I think, we all know them that have built many of the big banks. And the consolidation, I think, is a good thing. I mean, Governor Saludo did it back 2005 to 2007. Governor Sanusi had to have another round of this when we had the financial crisis. I mean, bigger, stronger banks are a good thing. And one of the things about banking, it's so complex now in terms of the technology, the fraud, the security, the compliance. There's a lot of demands on a bank, and you need some scale to be able to do that. So I think the stronger banks obviously will do better out of this. Some of the smaller banks may get absorbed, but ultimately having a great banking sector is as I said, one of the bright spots for Nigeria. But what I'd also like to see, and others have talked about, including Ageg Makbebe, is how important it is for the capital markets to develop. I mean, the banking sector is doing, just fine relatively. Capital markets still lag behind. In terms of long-term development of Nigeria, it's the capital markets that are actually a little bit more important. So, and of course, tying it back to what I said earlier, that's one reason why I'd like to see the NNPC floated to help develop the capital markets. But the banking sector is doing just fine in Nigeria.
Well, interesting stuff. Let's see how all of this plays out. It promises to be an interesting time, and we hope to also have you in again to talk to us about all this. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, Dr. Nevin, in one word, the geopolitical tensions that we see all around, how do you also see that shaping figures that we expect to see moving forward across the world?
I'm still an optimist despite all the tensions that we see. And I think that one thing, if we just look at the demographics, Africa, and I speak at the university about this to my classes. Africa is clearly on the rise, and despite all the challenges that we have, so I'm looking forward the next 10 or 15 years to a positive rise of Africa. I will leave the listeners though with one thought. I don't think we've absorbed what the impact on humanity is going to be about AI. I mean, it's only 2 years ago that ChatGPT came out, and it's already had a huge impact. So in 10 years, what is this going to look like? So I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist about Nigeria, about Africa. I'm an optimist globally that we'll solve many of our problems and challenges, climate change, socioeconomic gaps, etc. But I do think there needs to be some real hard thinking about where we go with AI, because, as I said, it's just 2 years since ChatGPT. It's moving so rapidly, and I don't think we've really thought through what are the implications on humanity of the let's call it the rise of the machines.
I must thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Nevin. Thank you. It's really good to see you on the program. Economics research professor joined us from Dallas, United States of America.
Thank you, Tolo. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.